Welcome to a spine-chilling supernatural mystery. Follow Lena Carter as she moves into a haunted house that's been empty for 12 years. When strange whispers start coming from a mysterious keyhole in the wall, she discovers she's not alone. What happened to the previous owner who vanished without a trace? And who or what is calling her name from behind the walls? If you're enjoying this creepy tale, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories. Let us know in the comments, do you believe in haunted houses? What would you do if you heard whispers through the walls? Share this with friends who love a good ghost story. The moving truck disappeared around the corner, leaving Lena Carter standing alone in front of her new home. The Victorian house loomed before her, its dark windows staring down like hollow eyes. 12 years. That's how long the house had been empty, according to the real estate agent, who seemed eager to close the deal and forget about the property altogether. Lena pulled her jacket tighter against the October wind and studied the house's weathered facade. The paint was peeling in long strips, and the wraparound porch sagged slightly on one side. Wild vines had claimed the left wall, their brown tendrils reaching toward the second-story windows like napping fingers. But beneath the neglect, she could see the house's former beauty, the intricate woodwork, the tall windows, the proud tower that rose from the eastern corner. It just needs some love, she whispered to herself, repeating the words she'd been saying for weeks. After her divorce, Lena needed a fresh start, and this house was all she could afford. The price had been suspiciously low, but she'd convinced herself it was just because of the needed repairs. She climbed the creaking porch steps and turned the key in the front door. The hinges groaned as she pushed it open, releasing a musty smell that spoke of years of abandonment. Dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the dirty windows. The interior was surprisingly intact. The previous owner, a woman named Margaret Whitmore, had left everything behind when she disappeared. Furniture sat beneath white sheets like sleeping ghosts. Family photos still hung on the walls, their subjects staring out with eyes that seemed to track Lena's movement across the room. Lena set down her purse and began exploring. The main floor held a living room with an ornate fireplace, a dining room with built-in china cabinets, and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1950s. A narrow staircase led to the second floor, where she found 3 bedrooms and a bathroom with an old clawfoot tub. But it was the third floor that intrigued her most. A smaller staircase, barely wide enough for one person, led up to what the real estate agent had called the tower room. Lena climbed carefully, testing each step. The stairs ended at a heavy wooden door with an old-fashioned keyhole. She turned the crystal doorknob and stepped into what had clearly been someone's private retreat. Unlike the rest of the house, this room was clean, as if someone had been caring for it all these years. Bookshelves lined 3 walls, filled with volumes on history, astronomy, and what looked like journals. A large desk sat beneath the room's single window, which offered a view of the entire neighborhood. An antique telescope stood in one corner. Lena moved to the desk, running her fingers over its polished surface. This had to be Margaret's study. But why was it so well preserved when the rest of the house showed signs of neglect? As she turned to leave, something caught her eye. In the wall beside the door, about 3 feet from the floor, was another keyhole, but this one didn't match any door she could see. It was simply set into the wall, as if it led to a hidden space. Beyond curious, Lena knelt down and peered through it. She could see nothing but darkness on the other side, but she felt a strange chill as if cold air was seeping through the tiny opening. Double quotes, Lena, ... She jerked back, her heart pounding. The whisper had been so soft she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. But the sound had definitely come from behind the wall. Through that mysterious keyhole, she pressed her ear against the wall, listening intently. Nothing, just the normal sounds of an old house, settling creaking wood, sighing pipes, the whisper of wind through loose shingles. But she could have sworn someone had called her name. Shaking her head, Lena stood up and brushed the dust from her knees. Moving stress, she told herself. The real estate agent had mentioned that buyers sometimes reported strange sounds in the house, but he'd dismissed them as normal old house noises. Pipes, he'd said, or maybe squirrels in the walls. She made her way back downstairs and began the process of making the house livable. She pulled sheets off furniture, opened windows to air out the stuffiness, and started a list of repairs that needed attention. The work helped distract her from the memory of that whispered name. As evening approached, Lena realized she'd forgotten to buy food for dinner. The kitchen cabinets were bare except for a few canned goods that had been left behind, their labels faded with age. She grabbed her keys and headed for the grocery store, relieved to escape the house's watchful silence. The local grocery store was small but stocked. As Lena filled her cart with essentials, she found herself chatting with the cashier, a middle-aged woman named Ruth who seemed friendly enough. "You must be the one who bought the Whitmore place," Ruth said, scanning Lena's items. "I heard someone finally took it off the market." "Yes, I just moved in today," Lena replied. "It's quite a house." "Did you know Margaret Whitmore?" Ruth's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. Everyone knew Margaret. She was ... Well, she was different. Kept to herself, mostly, especially after her husband died. Spent most of her time up in that tower room of hers, watching the stars. The real estate agent said she just disappeared one day. 12 years ago, come November, Ruth nodded. Police searched everywhere, but they never found a trace of her. Some folks think she just packed up and left town, but she leaned closer and lowered her voice. She left everything behind. Her purse, her car, even her wedding ring was still on the nightstand. What woman leaves without her wedding ring? Lena felt a chill run down her spine. What do you think happened to her? Ruth shrugged, but her eyes were troubled. Hard to say, that house has always been strange. Margaret's husband, Thomas, used to complain about voices in the walls, said. He could hear people talking, but never could find where the sounds were coming from. Voices in the walls. Old houses make noise, Ruth said quickly, as if trying to convince herself. Could have been anything, but Thomas got so bothered by it that he started sleeping in the guest room downstairs. Margaret never seemed to mind. Though, sometimes I wonder if she heard different voices than he did. Lena paid for her groceries, her mind racing, voices in the walls, just like the whisper she'd heard through that mysterious keyhole. The drive back to Maple Street felt longer than it should have. The house looked different in the darkness, more imposing somehow. A few lights were on in neighboring homes, casting warm glows through their windows. But her house stood dark and unwelcoming. She carried her groceries inside and flipped on lights as she went, pushing back the shadows that seemed to press in from every corner. The house felt colder than when she'd left, and she made a mental note to check the heating system tomorrow as she put away her groceries. Lena found herself glancing frequently at the ceiling, thinking about the tower room above. She'd been so focused on the mysterious keyhole that she hadn't really examined the books on Margaret's shelves. Maybe they would give her some insight into the woman who had lived here, and what had happened to her. After a quick dinner of canned soup and crackers, Lena made her way back up to the third floor. The tower room looked different in the lamplight, cozier somehow, but also more mysterious. The shadows seemed deeper, and the books on the shelves appeared to lean inward. As if listening to her movements, she approached the wall where the keyhole was set and knelt down again. This time, she could see a faint outline around the hole, as if it had been cut into the wall rather than built in. Someone had deliberately created this peephole, but why? As she studied it, she noticed something else. The wall around the keyhole was slightly discolored, as if someone had spent a lot of time kneeling in this exact spot, wearing away the paint with their hands. Double quotes, Lena ... This time there was no doubt. The whisper came clearly through the keyhole, soft but distinct, and it was definitely her name. She pressed her face closer to the wall, her heart racing. "Hello," she called softly. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, so faint she had to hold her breath to hear it. "Help me ... Lena scrambled backward, knocking over a small table. The lamp on it crashed to the floor, plunging the room into darkness. She fumbled for the light switch, her hands shaking. When the lights came back on, the room looked exactly the same as before. But now she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was not alone in this house. Lena barely slept that first night. Every creak and groan of the old house made her sit up in bed, listening for more whispers from the walls. She'd chosen the master bedroom on the second floor, directly below the tower room, and she found herself staring at the ceiling, wondering what secrets lay hidden above her head. When morning finally came, she was exhausted but determined. If there was someone or something behind that wall, she needed to find out what it was. Her first stop was the local library, hoping to learn more about the house's history and Margaret Whitmore's disappearance. The Millbrook Public Library was a small brick building that looked like it hadn't changed much since the 1960s. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, was eager to help when Lena explained she was researching the Whitmore property. "Oh, that poor woman," Mrs. Henderson said, shaking her head. "Such a tragedy. Margaret was one of our regular patrons, you know. She loved history books, especially anything about local families and old houses. She was working on some kind of research project before she went missing." "What kind of research?" Lena asked. Mrs. Henderson led her to a corner table stacked with boxes. "After she disappeared, the police brought us her library materials. They thought there might be clues in what she'd been studying. When they closed the case, we just kept everything here. I suppose we should have returned the books to circulation, but somehow it never felt right." Lena opened the first box with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of books about Victorian architecture, local history, and genealogy. There were also several notebooks filled with Margaret's handwriting knit, careful script that documented her research. One notebook was dedicated entirely to her house. Margaret had traced its ownership back to 1887, when it was built by a wealthy businessman named Edmund Blackwood. The Blackwood family had lived there for 3 generations before selling it to Thomas and Margaret Whitmore in 1985. But it was the newspaper clippings that made Lena's blood run cold. "Blackwood daughter vanishes from locked room," read a headline. From October 1923, the article described how 15-year-old Catherine Blackwood had disappeared from her bedroom on the 3rd floor of the family mansion. Her door was locked from the inside. The windows were too high to climb down from, and there was no other way out of the room. She was never found. Another clipping from 1954. Mystery surrounds disappearance of local woman. Sarah Blackwood, Edmund's granddaughter, had vanished from the same house. Again, she'd last been seen going up to the 3rd floor and was never found. Lena's hands shook as she turned the pages. Margaret had documented a pattern. Every 30 or so years, a woman disappeared from that house without a trace, and Margaret herself had become the latest victim in 2011. At the bottom of the notebook, in Margaret's increasingly frantic handwriting, were notes about voices in the walls and the door that isn't a door. She'd drawn diagrams of the 3rd floor, marking the location of the mysterious keyhole. Her final entry, dated just days before her disappearance, was barely legible. "I know she's there, Catherine. She's been trying to tell me something. The keyhole, it's not a keyhole at all. It's a way to see her, to hear her. She's trapped. And she's not alone. There are others. I have to help them. I have to find the way in." Lena closed the notebook with shaking hands. Margaret had heard the same whispers, seen the same keyhole, and now she was gone, just like all the others. Did the police investigate the connection between these disappearances? Lena asked Mrs. Henderson. The librarian nodded grimly. They looked into it, but what could they prove? The disappearances were decades apart, different families. They concluded it was just an unfortunate coincidence. But between you and me, I don't think anyone in this town really believes that. Lena spent the rest of the morning reading through Margaret's research. The picture that emerged was troubling. The house on Maple Street wasn't just old and neglected. It was cursed, or haunted, or worse. And now she was living there, hearing the same voices that had lured Margaret to her fate. She returned home that afternoon with a new determination. If Margaret had found some way in to wherever the voices were coming from, maybe Lena could find it too. But unlike Margaret, she wasn't going alone. She had no intention of becoming the next woman to vanish without a trace. Back in the tower room, Lena examined the wall around the mysterious keyhole more carefully. In daylight, she could see what Margaret's diagrams had hinted at. The wall wasn't quite right. The molding didn't match the rest of the room, and the wallpaper was newer, as if this section had been patched or repaired. She pressed her palms against the wall, feeling for any give or hollow spaces. About 2 feet to the right of the keyhole, her fingers found something, a slight depression in the wall, hidden beneath layers of paint and paper. It felt like a button. Lena pressed it gently and heard a soft click. Suddenly, a section of the wall swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Her heart pounding, she grabbed a flashlight from the desk and peered into the opening. The passage was barely wide enough for one person, and it curved away into darkness. The air that drifted out was cold and stale, carrying with it the faint scent of old wood and something else, something that reminded her of flowers left too long in a vase. "Margaret," she called softly into the passage. "Are you there?" Her voice echoed strangely in the narrow space, seeming to travel much farther than it should have. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from deep within the hidden passage, came an answer, not in words, but in the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming closer. Lena stepped back from the opening, her mind racing. Someone was in there. Someone was walking toward her through that narrow, hidden corridor. But was it Margaret, or Catherine Blackwood, or something else entirely? The footsteps stopped just beyond the range of her flashlight beam. "Please," came a whisper from the darkness. "Please help us." It was a woman's voice, but Lena couldn't tell if it belonged to anyone she would recognize. The voice was hollow, echoing as if it came from very far away, from someone who had been away from the living world for a very long time. "Who are you?" Lena called back. "What happened to you?" "Trapped," the voice replied. "So long, trapped behind the walls. Catherine. Sarah, ... Margaret. All of us. We can't get out." Lena's blood turned to ice. If the voice was telling the truth, then all the missing women weren't gone, they were still here, somehow imprisoned in the hidden passages of this house. "How can I help you?" she asked. The footsteps resumed, coming closer still. Lena could almost make out a figure in the darkness, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a long dress or gown. "Find the key," the voice said. "The real key. Not the one that locks us in, but the one that sets us free. It's here, in the house. Find it. Before... Double quotes. Before what?" But the voice was fading, and the footsteps were retreating. "Before he comes back," came the whispered reply. "Before the next new moon. Find the key, or you'll join us behind these walls forever." The passage fell silent, leaving Lena alone with her racing heart and 1,000 new questions. Who was he? What key were they talking about? And what happened during the new moon? She checked her phone calendar. The new moon was in 5 days. 5 days to solve a mystery that had puzzled the town for nearly a century. 5 days to find a key that might not even exist. 5 days to save not just herself, but all the women who had vanished before her. As she stood there in the tower room, staring into the dark passage, Lena realized that her new life in this house had become something far more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. She wasn't just dealing with a haunted house. She was racing against time to prevent herself from becoming its next victim. But she also felt something else: determination. Those women had been waiting for decades for someone to help them. Margaret had tried and failed. But maybe Lena could succeed where she had not. She stepped back and let the hidden door swing shut, but not before memorizing every detail of the passage beyond. Tomorrow, she would begin her search for the mysterious key. Tonight, she would prepare for what might be the most important investigation of her life as she made her way downstairs. Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. From behind every wall, that the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if she would be its savior or its next prisoner. The next 3 days blurred together in a frantic search through every corner of the house. Lena had called in sick to her new job, a decision that would have consequences later. But she couldn't focus on anything except finding the mysterious key that might free the trapped women. She started with the obvious places: drawers, jewelry, boxes, and the small safe she'd found hidden behind a painting in the master bedroom. The safe had been easy to open. The combination was written on a slip of paper taped to the back of Margaret's family photo. Inside, Lena found important documents, some cash, and several pieces of antique jewelry, but no key that seemed significant. Margaret's notebooks had mentioned that the key was hidden in plain sight and where time stands still. Lena puzzled over these clues as she methodically searched room by room. What in the house could represent time standing still? On the 3rd day, exhausted and growing desperate, she found herself back in the tower room, staring at Margaret's telescope. The brass instrument was pointed toward the window, aimed at a specific spot in the sky. Curious, Lena looked through the eyepiece. The telescope was focused on the town's old clock tower, visible in the distance through the bare branches of autumn trees. But there was something odd about the view. The clock face appeared to be frozen at 11:47. "Where time stands still," Lena whispered. She adjusted the telescope's focus and realized the clock had been stopped for years, its hands forever pointing to that specific time. But why 11:47? What was significant about that moment? A memory surfaced from Margaret's research. Catherine Blackwood, the first girl to disappear, had last been seen at 11:47 p.m. on October 31st, 1923. The police report had noted the exact time, because the grandfather clock in the hallway had chimed just as her mother checked on her. Lena's pulse quickened. She examined the telescope more carefully, running her hands over its smooth brass surface. Near the base, she found what she was looking for, a small compartment that opened with a gentle twist. Inside was an ornate brass key, its head shaped like a crescent moon. The key was warm to the touch, as if it had been held recently. Engraved on its surface were symbols that looked like constellations, the same patterns Lena had seen in Margaret's astronomy books. She carried the key down to the second floor and hesitated, outside the door to what had been Catherine Blackwood's room, according to Margaret's floor plans. It was now just a spare bedroom, but Lena could feel something different about Itan, electric tension in the air, as if the room was waiting for something to happen. The door was locked, though she didn't remember it being that way before. The brass key fit perfectly in the old-fashioned keyhole. As she turned it, Lena heard a soft click, followed by a sound like distant wind chimes. The room beyond was not what she expected. Instead of the spare bedroom she remembered, Lena found herself looking into a space that seemed much larger than should have been possible. The walls were covered in mirrors of different shapes and sizes, creating an optical illusion that made it impossible to judge the room's true dimensions. Some mirrors reflected her own image, but others showed different scenes, entirely glimpses of the past. She realized in one mirror, she saw a young girl in 1920s clothing, sitting at a writing desk and penning something in a diary. Catherine Blackwood, she assumed. In another, a woman from the 1950s was pressing her hands against what looked like glass, her mouth open in a silent scream. Sarah Blackwood. And in a third mirror, Lena saw Margaret Whitmore, looking exactly as she had in her family photos, walking through a corridor that seemed to stretch on forever. "You found it." Lena spun around to find a woman standing behind her, not reflected in any of the mirrors, but actually there in the room. She was elderly, with silver hair and kind eyes, wearing a cardigan that looked like it belonged to the 1950s. "I'm Sarah Blackwood," the woman said gently, "Edmund's granddaughter. I've been waiting 69 years for someone to find that key." Are you... Are you dead?" Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah smiled sadly. "Not dead, exactly. Trapped. We're all trapped in the spaces between the real world and somewhere else. He put us here, and we can't leave." "Who is he, Edmund?" Sarah said, and her expression darkened. "My grandfather wasn't the successful businessman everyone thought he was. He was obsessed with time, with finding a way to live forever. He built this house as a kind of prison, a place where time moves differently. Every 30 years, when the conditions are right, he takes another woman to add to his collection." Lena felt sick. "Collection? We're not the only ones," Sarah continued. "There are women here from before Catherine, going back to when the house was first built. Dozens of us, all trapped in these mirror rooms, existing in a space that's neither fully alive nor fully dead. But why women? Why only women?" Sarah's face grew grim. Because he believes women hold the secret to eternal life. Something about life-giving power, the ability to create. He's been experimenting on us for over a century, trying to steal that power for himself. Lena looked around at the mirrors. Again, seeing more scenes now. Women of different ages and time periods. All trapped in similar rooms. All pressing their hands against invisible barriers. Margaret figured it out, Sarah continued. She found the patterns in the disappearances. Found the key. Found this room. But she was too late. It was the night of the new moon, and Edmund was already coming for her. She tried to free us, but she became trapped instead. Where is Edmund now? He only manifests during certain times. The new moon gives him the most power, especially when it falls on Halloween. That's tomorrow night, Lena. He's coming for you. Lena's heart pounded. How do you know my name? We've been watching you since you moved in. We've been trying to warn you, to help you find the key before it was too late. But time is running out. The key opened this room, but how does it free you? Sarah walked to the center of the room, where Lena now noticed a pedestal holding what looked like an antique music box. The key doesn't just open doors, she said. It also winds time. Edmund's power comes from keeping us frozen in these moments, suspended between seconds. If you can restart time in this room, we'll be free. And Edmund, his power will be broken. He'll be forced back to whatever realm he came from, unable to return. Lena approached the music box cautiously. It was beautiful, made of dark wood with silver inlays that matched the symbols on the key. What happens if I fail? Then tomorrow night, you join us behind these mirrors. And 30 years from now, Edmund will claim another victim. The weight of responsibility settled on Lena's shoulders like a heavy cloak. All these women, trapped for decades, waiting for someone brave enough to free them. And if she failed, she would spend eternity in this strange half-world, watching helplessly, as more women suffered the same fate. Tell me what to do, she said firmly. Sarah smiled. And for the first time since Lena had entered this nightmare house, she felt a spark of hope. The music box needs to be wound at exactly 11:47, the moment when Catherine was taken, the moment when all our time stopped. But it has to be done during Edmund's manifestation, when his power is strongest. Only then will the key have enough force to break his hold on us. So I have to face him directly. Yes, and Lena. He's not going to let you do this without a fight. Edmund has had over a century to perfect his powers. He can make you see things, feel things, believe things that aren't real. You have to stay focused on the music box, no matter what he shows. You, Lena nodded, trying to project more confidence than she felt. What time does he usually appear? Midnight. Always midnight on the new moon. That gave her less than 24 hours to prepare. She looked around the mirror room one more. Time, meeting the eyes of the trapped women in their glass prisons. They were all watching her with expressions of hope and fear, their fate resting in her hands. I won't let you down, she promised them. As she turned to leave, Sarah called after her, Lena, be careful who you trust tomorrow night. Edmund is clever, and he's had a long time to plan. Things are not always what they seem. The warning sent a chill down Lena's spine, but she nodded and stepped back through the doorway. The room immediately returned to its normal appearance, just a spare bedroom with dusty furniture and drawn curtains. But in her hand, the crescent moon key grew warm, as if it were counting down the hours until her confrontation with Edmund Blackwood. Tomorrow night, she would either free dozens of innocent women from their eternal prison, or become the newest addition to Edmund's horrifying collection. The house settled around her with its familiar creaks and groans. But now Lena heard something different in those sounds. It wasn't just the settling of old wood and pipe, it was the whispered prayers of the trapped women, all hoping that tomorrow night would finally bring them peace. Halloween night arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to seep through the walls of the house itself. Lena had spent the day preparing, reading through Margaret's notebooks one more time and trying to steel herself for what was to come. She'd eaten an early dinner, knowing she might not get another chance for a while, and had placed the crescent moon key on a chain around her neck for safekeeping as evening fell. She found herself pacing the first floor, checking the clocks throughout the house. They all showed different times, as if the house itself existed in multiple temporal zones. Only the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to keep accurate time, its pendulum swinging with hypnotic regularity. At 11:30 p.m., Lena made her way up to the second floor and approached Catherine's room, the mirror room that had appeared when she'd first used the key. To her surprise, the door was already standing open, though she was certain she'd closed it behind her the day before. The room beyond looked different now. The mirrors were darker, their surfaces rippling like water, and the reflections they showed were more active. Lena could see the trapped women moving within their glass prisons, their faces turned toward her with desperate hope. The music box sat on its pedestal in the center of the room, waiting. Lena checked her watch. 11:45. 2 minutes until the crucial moment. She approached the music box and inserted the key into the small keyhole at its base, but didn't turn it. Yet she needed to wait for Edmund to appear. At exactly 11:47, the temperature in the room plummeted. Lena's breath formed clouds in the suddenly frigid air, and frost began to form on the surfaces of the mirrors. The reflections of the trapped women disappeared, replaced by swirling darkness. Then he materialized. Edmund Blackwood was not what Lena had expected. Instead of a ghostly figure or terrifying monster, he appeared as a distinguished gentleman. In his 50s, wearing a perfectly tailored Victorian suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, his mustache precisely trimmed, and his dark eyes sparkled with intelligence and something that might have been amusement. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice cultured and pleasant. "How delightful to finally meet you properly. I do hope you've been comfortable in my home." "This isn't your home anymore," Lena replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Let these women go?" Edmund chuckled, a sound like expensive brandy being poured into crystal. "My dear girl, you misunderstand the situation entirely. These ladies are my guests, my companions in a great work that transcends the ordinary limitations of human existence. They are part of something magnificent. They're prisoners, are they?" Edmund gestured to the mirrors around them. "Look more closely." Against her better judgment, Lena glanced at the nearest mirror. Instead of seeing trapped women pressing against glass barriers, she saw what looked like elegant tea parties. The women were dressed in beautiful gowns, laughing and chatting with each other, seemingly content and happy, you see. Edmund said smoothly, "They want for nothing. Time has no meaning here. They will never age, never know sickness or sorrow or death. I have given them the greatest gift, possibly mortality." Lena shook her head, trying to clear the images from her mind. "That's not real. You're showing me illusions. Reality is subjective, my dear. What you call illusion, I call a higher truth." Edmund began to walk around the room, his movements graceful and predatory. "But perhaps you would prefer to see a different truth." The mirrors changed again, and now Lena saw herself in them, but not as she was now. In one reflection, she was dressed in a stunning ball gown, waltzing with a handsome partner at what looked like a grand Victorian party. In another, she was reading by a fireplace in a beautiful library, surrounded by leather-bound books and golden lamplight. A third showed her painting at an easel, creating masterpieces that would hang in galleries forever. "I could give you anything you desire," Edmund said, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality. "Love, beauty, artistic achievement, intellectual pursuits, all of it eternal, all of it perfect. No more struggling to pay bills, no more loneliness, no more fear of growing old, just endless perfection." For a moment, Lena found herself wavering. The visions in the mirrors were seductive, showing her a life free from all the concerns and disappointments she'd known. What would it be like to never worry about money again, to never feel the sting of rejection or the weight of responsibilities? But then she remembered Sarah's warning about trusting what she saw, and she forced herself to look away from the mirrors. "Where's Margaret?" she demanded. "Show me Margaret Whitmore." Edmund's expression darkened slightly. Margaret was stubborn. She refused to see the beauty of what I offered, but she came around eventually. He gestured to one of the mirrors, and Lena saw Margaret there, but not as the happy woman in the illusions. This Margaret looked exhausted and defeated, sitting alone in what looked like a small, windowless cell. She was writing frantically in a diary, her movements jerky and desperate. "She spends her time documenting her experiences," Edmund said dismissively. "Quite tedious, really. I had hoped she would be more adaptable." Anger flared in Lena's chest. "You're torturing them." "I'm preserving them," Edmund corrected. "The process requires some ... adjustment time. But eventually, they all find peace in their new existence." "By eventually, you mean after you break their spirits completely?" Edmund's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and ancient underneath. "Spirits are meant to be refined, Miss Carter, like diamonds under pressure. The weak break, yes, but the strong emerge transformed into something beautiful and eternal." Lena's hand closed around the key at her throat. She needed to keep him talking while she figured out the best moment to wind the music box. But Edmund was too clever. He seemed to sense her intentions. "Ah, yes," he said, noticing her gesture. "You found my little temporal key. Quite ingenious, don't you think? It took me years to perfect the enchantments that would allow it to manipulate the flow of time itself. If you made it, then you know what I plan to do with it." "Indeed I do. You plan to wind that music box and somehow restore linear time to this room, believing it will free my guests." He smiled indulgently. "My dear girl, do you really think I would create a device capable of undoing my own work? That key doesn't free anyone, it simply adds them to my collection more efficiently." Lena felt her heart sink, but then she remembered something Sarah had told her. Things are not always what they seem. Maybe Edmund was lying, trying to discourage her from attempting the ritual. "Then why try to stop me?" she challenged. "If the key won't work, let me try it." Edmund's smile faltered slightly. "Because I've grown fond of you, Miss Carter. You have such potential. I would hate to see you waste it on a futile gesture." "Show me the real Margaret," Lena demanded. "Not your illusion. Show me what she wrote in her diary." Edmund's expression grew annoyed. "Very well, if you insist on unpleasant truths." The mirror showing Margaret shifted, and Lena could now see the pages of the diary Margaret was writing. The handwriting was shaky but determined. Day 847 in this place. I was wrong about the key. It doesn't free us by winding the music box, it frees us by destroying it. Edmund lied about creating the key. It's older than him, older than the house. It was made by someone who wanted to stop him. But you have to break the music box at exactly 11:47, not wind it. The mirrors will shatter, time will snap back to normal, and his power will be broken. Tell whoever finds this break the box. Don't wind it, break I. Edmund snarled and waved his hand. The image disappeared. Enough of this nonsense. Margaret has been here too long, she's become delusional. But Lena had seen enough. Margaret's warning felt true in a way that Edmund's smooth lies did not. She looked at the ornate music box sitting on its pedestal. Break it, not wind it. You know what I find interesting, Lena said, slowly backing toward the music box. For someone who supposedly created this key, you seem awfully worried about what I might do with it. I am not worried, Edmund said, but his voice had lost its cultured warmth. I am simply trying to save you from making a terrible mistake. The only mistake I made was listening to you at all. Before Edmund could react, Lena spun around and grabbed the music box from its pedestal. It was heavier than she'd expected, and warm to the touch, as if it contained some internal fire. Stop, Edmund roared, his pleasant facade finally cracking. Completely. You don't understand what you're doing. The mirrors around the room began to pulse with dark energy, and the temperature dropped even further. Lena could see Edmund's true form, now not the distinguished gentleman, but something ancient and skeletal, with eyes like burning coals. I understand perfectly, Lena said, raising the music box above her head. You're a parasite who's been feeding off these women for over a century, but your feeding time is over. She brought the music box down hard against the stone pedestal. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The moment the music box shattered, the mirrors around the room exploded in a shower of glass and brilliant light. Edmund screamed a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, reverberating through the walls of the house itself. Time seemed to hiccup, like a record player skipping, and suddenly the room was full of people. Real people, not reflections. Lena saw Catherine Blackwood, looking exactly as she had in 1923, blinking in confusion as she found herself suddenly free. Sarah Blackwood was there too, along with Margaret Whitmore and dozens of other women from different time periods, all looking dazed but alive. Edmund was writhing on the floor, his form becoming less and less solid with each passing second. You've ruined everything, he gasped. Centuries of work, all destroyed. Good, Lena said firmly. With a final shriek of rage, Edmund Blackwood dissolved into nothingness, leaving only a small pile of dust where he had been standing. The house around them began to shake and groan, as if it too were falling apart without Edmund's supernatural influence holding it together. Cracks appeared in the walls, and chunks of plaster began to fall from the ceiling. Everyone out, Margaret shouted, taking charge of the situation. The house is collapsing. They all rushed toward the door, but as they reached it, Lena realized something that made her heart sink. If these women had been trapped for decades, for nearly a century, what would happen to them in the modern world? They had no identification, no families who would remember them, no way to prove who they were. As if reading her thoughts, Sarah Blackwood placed a gentle hand on her arm. Don't worry about us, she said. We've had a long time to think about this moment. We have plans. But how will you? Some of us will return to our own times, Sarah explained as they hurried down the shaking staircase. The breaking of Edmund's spell doesn't just free us from the mirrors, it repairs the damage he did to time itself. Catherine will go back to 1923, I'll return to 1954, and so on. What about Margaret? Margaret herself answered from behind them. I'm staying here, in this time. This is where I belong now. Besides, someone needs to make sure that house is properly destroyed so this can never happen again. They burst out of the front door just as the roof began to cave in. The Victorian mansion that had stood on Maple Street for over a century was collapsing in on itself, as if it had aged 100 years in the space of minutes. Lena watched in amazement as the women around her began to fade like morning mist, not disappearing, but returning to their proper places in time. Catherine waved goodbye with a smile that was radiant with freedom, and Sarah squeezed Lena's hand one final time, before she too vanished. Within minutes, only Lena and Margaret were left standing on the lawn, watching the house complete its destruction. When the dust finally settled, nothing remained but a pile of rubble and the memory of the horrors that had taken place there. What will you tell people? Margaret asked. Lena looked at the woman who had been missing for 12 years, but appeared not to have aged a day. I'll think of something. Gas, leak, explosion, maybe. As for you, we'll say, you had amnesia and just recovered your memory. Margaret smiled. That's kind, but unnecessary. I have some money put aside from before I disappeared. I can start over somewhere new. But what about you? You've lost your house. Lena laughed, surprising herself. Good riddance. I never want to see another Victorian mansion as long as I live. As they walked away from the ruins, Margaret turned to her one final time. Thank you, she said simply, for having the courage to do what I couldn't. You did plenty, Lena replied. Your research, your diary entries, they're what made this possible. We all saved each other. The next morning, Lena sat in a coffee shop downtown, reading the newspaper coverage of the mysterious explosion that had destroyed the house on Maple Street. The fire department was baffled by the cause, and the insurance company was launching an investigation. But no one was asking the right questions, and Lena intended to keep it that way. Her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret, who had indeed started a new life in the next town over. Saw the news. Are you okay? Lena typed back, better than okay. Free, and she was. For the first time in months, she felt truly free, not just from the supernatural horrors of Edmund Blackwood, but from the weight of secrets and fear she'd been carrying. She'd lost a house, but she'd gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that she was capable of extraordinary courage when it truly mattered. As she finished her coffee and prepared to start apartment hunting, Lena couldn't help but smile. She'd come to Millbrook looking for a new beginning, and she'd certainly found one, just not in the way she'd expected. The women who had been trapped for so long were free now, returned to their proper times and lives. Edmund Blackwood was gone forever, and Lena Carter had learned that sometimes the most important adventures are the ones you never planned on having. She walked out into the bright autumn sunshine, ready to write the next chapter of her story one. That would definitely not include any mysterious keyholes or whispers from behind the walls. Some secrets, she'd learned, are worth uncovering, but some houses are better left as rubble. Detective Sarah Mills had seen many strange things in her. 15 years on the force, but nothing quite like this. She stood in the doorway of apartment 4B, staring at what should have been impossible. The room was completely empty, yet just 12 hours ago. Witnesses had seen Rebecca Chen entering this very apartment, key in hand, grocery bags in tow. Tell me again what you saw, Sarah said to Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who had called the police that morning. Mrs. Patterson clutched, her floral robe tighter around her thin frame. Her grey hair was still in curlers, and her hands shook slightly as she pointed toward the empty apartment. I heard her come in around 8 last night. The walls are thin, you know. I heard her footsteps, heard her put things down, probably those grocery bags. Then I heard her shower running round 9. Sarah made notes in her small pad. And this morning I knocked to borrow some sugar for my coffee. I always borrow sugar from Rebecca on Wednesdays. She never answers her door. But today felt different. The silence was ... wrong. Mrs. Patterson's voice cracked. I used my spare key. She gave it to me for emergencies. The door was locked from the inside. Detective, locked from the inside, and the apartment was empty. Not just Rebecca gone, everything gone. Sarah stepped further into the apartment, her footsteps echoing in the bare space. The hardwood floors were clean, almost polished. There were no furniture marks, no carpet impressions, no sign that anyone had ever lived here. The walls were a fresh coat of white paint with no nail holes, no scuff marks, nothing. How long had Rebecca lived here? Sarah asked. 3 years. She moved in right after her divorce. Sweet girl, worked as a nurse at General Hospital. Always quiet, always polite. Mrs. Patterson wiped her eyes with a tissue. Detective, where are her things? Her furniture, her clothes, her cat. She had a grey tabby named Whiskers. Sarah's partner, Detective Tom Rodriguez, appeared in the doorway. He was a tall man with kind brown eyes and 20 years of experience that had taught him to expect the unexpected. But even he looked puzzled. Talked to the building manager. Tom said, Robert Kim, he's been managing this place for 8 years. He confirms Rebecca Chen has lived here for 3 years, paid her rent on time, no complaints. He also confirms he never gave permission for any moving trucks yesterday. Moving trucks, that's just it, there weren't any. I checked with all. The neighbors, nobody saw any moving activity yesterday. No trucks, no boxes, no movers. Mrs. Patterson here was home all day and saw nothing. Sarah walked to the kitchen area. The cabinets were empty, but they were clean, too clean. She opened the refrigerator. Empty as well, but it was still cold and running. She checked the bathroom. No towels, no toiletries, no shower curtain. But the bathroom smelled faintly of soap and shampoo. Mrs. Patterson, you said you heard the shower running last night. Yes, around 9. I was watching my evening shows. I remember because the water pressure in this building is terrible, and when someone showers, you can hear the pipes. Tom examined the bathroom more closely. Sarah, look at this. He was pointing to the bathtub. There were still a few drops of water in the corner, and the drain showed signs of recent use. Someone definitely showered here last night, Tom confirmed. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. In all her years as a detective, she had dealt with missing persons, home invasions, even elaborate theft schemes. But she had never encountered anything like this. A person and all their belongings vanishing overnight from a locked apartment. What about the hospital where she worked? Sarah asked. Tom pulled out his phone. I called them on the way over. Rebecca Chen was scheduled to work the night shift last night. She never showed up, never called in sick. They tried calling her this morning, but got no answer. Sarah walked to the living room window and looked out at the street below. It was a typical Wednesday morning in the quiet neighborhood. People walking their dogs, heading to work, living their normal lives. But somewhere, Rebecca Chen had simply ceased to exist in any traceable way. Mrs. Patterson, did Rebecca have any family? Friends who visited regularly? Her sister Emily lives across town. They had lunch every Sunday. Rebecca was ... lonely, I think. The divorce was hard on her. She kept to herself mostly, but she was always kind to me. She'd check on me when I was sick, bring me soup. Sarah made a note to contact Emily Chen, any boyfriends, anyone she might have been seeing. Mrs. Patterson hesitated. There was a man who came by sometimes in the evenings. Tall, dark hair, always wore nice suits. But I never met him properly. Rebecca was private about her personal life. How often did you see him? Maybe once a week for the past month or so. But detective, even if she decided to move in with someone, why would she leave without telling anyone? And how could she move everything out without anyone seeing? That was the question that bothered Sarah the most. In her experience, people didn't just vanish. There were always traces, always clues. But this apartment looked like it had been professionally cleaned and emptied, as if Rebecca Chen had never existed. Tom's phone buzzed. He answered it and spoke quietly for a few minutes before hanging up. That was the lab. They're sending a team to process the apartment. But Sarah... double quotes. He paused. I also ran Rebecca Chen's name through our databases. There's no record of her calling in sick to work. No credit card activity since yesterday morning. No cell phone pings since 8:30 last night. Sarah felt the familiar tingle of a complex case beginning to unfold. She had built her reputation on solving the unsolvable, on finding patterns where others saw only chaos. But this case felt different. It felt like the beginning of something much larger than a simple missing person report. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to think carefully. In the past few weeks, did you notice anything different about Rebecca? Did she seem worried, scared, or excited about something? The elderly woman considered this carefully. Now that you mention it, she did seem nervous lately. Last week, she asked me if I had noticed anyone hanging around the building who didn't belong. Strange men, people watching the apartments. I told her no, but double quotes, but what? I did notice a car parked across the street several times in the past 2 weeks. Dark blue sedan. It would be there in the evenings, but gone by morning, I thought. It was odd, because we don't have many visitors in this neighborhood. Sarah exchanged a look with Tom. Now they had something to work with. As they prepared to leave the empty apartment, Sarah took one last look around. Somewhere in this puzzle of impossibility lay the truth about Rebecca Chen's disappearance. And Sarah Mills was determined to find it. No matter how deep the mystery went, the empty room held its secrets close. But Sarah had learned long ago that every mystery had a solution. She just had to be patient enough to find it. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the police station with a large coffee and a growing list of questions. She had spent the night thinking about the impossible apartment, and every angle she considered only made the mystery deeper. Tom was already at his desk, surrounded by papers and typing rapidly on his computer. Please tell me you found something, Sarah said, settling into her chair across from his desk. Actually, yes, but it's weird. Tom looked up from his screen. I spent half the night digging into Rebecca Chen's life, and what I found doesn't match what we saw yesterday. Sarah leaned forward. What do you mean Rebecca Chen exists? No question about that. Social security number, tax records, employment history, the works. But here's where it gets strange. According to her digital footprint, she's been planning to disappear. Tom handed Sarah a stack of printed emails and bank records. 3 weeks ago, she started liquidating her assets. She sold her car to a used car dealer across town. She closed her savings account and withdrew everything in cash, $12,000. She cancelled her magazine subscriptions, her gym membership, even her Netflix account. Sarah studied the documents. This looks like someone planning to leave town, not someone who vanished mysteriously. Exactly, but here's what doesn't make sense. She kept paying her rent. She paid for next month just 5 days ago, and she was still buying groceries, still going to work, still living her normal life. It's like she was planning to disappear, but also planning to stay. Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Emily Chen. Detective Mills. This is Emily Chen. I heard about my sister from her work. They said she's missing. Miss Chen, yes, we're investigating your sister's disappearance. Could you come to the station? We'd like to ask you some questions. I'm already on my way. 20 minutes later, Emily Chen sat in the station's interview room. She was in her early 30s, with the same delicate features as Rebecca, but where? Rebecca had been described as quiet and reserved. Emily seemed anxious and energetic. Rebecca would never just disappear, Emily insisted. She's the most responsible person I know. She calls me every Tuesday night at exactly 7 o'clock. We've had that routine for 2 years. When did you last speak with her? Sarah asked. Tuesday night, as usual. She seemed ... different. Excited about something, but also nervous. She kept saying she had something important to tell me, but then she'd change the subject. Tom pulled out his notepad. Did she mention any plans to travel? Anyone new in her life? Emily hesitated. She mentioned a man she'd been seeing. She was very secretive about it, which wasn't like Rebecca. Usually, she told me everything. But this time, she would only say that he was complicated and that she needed to be careful. Careful about what? I don't know, I pressed her, but she said she'd explain everything soon. She made me promise to have lunch with her this Sunday, like always. Said she had news that would change everything. Sarah felt a familiar tingle. In her experience, people who talked about changing everything were often in more danger than they realized. Emily, did your sister ever mention feeling followed or watched? Funny you should ask. Last month, she called me paranoid because she thought someone was following her home from work. She said she kept seeing the same car behind her, but when she'd try to get a better look, it would disappear. Tom and Sarah exchanged glances. The blue sedan Mrs. Patterson had mentioned. What kind of car? She said it was dark blue, maybe a sedan. She only mentioned it that once, but it really bothered her. After Emily left, promising to call if she remembered anything else, Sarah and Tom returned to their desks to piece together what they knew. So Rebecca was planning something, Sarah said, spreading the documents across her desk. She liquidated her assets, but kept her apartment. She was seeing a mysterious man she wouldn't talk about. She felt like she was being followed, and she promised her sister news that would change everything. Tom nodded, and then she vanished from a locked apartment after taking a shower, leaving no trace that she was ever there. Sarah's computer chimed with an email from the forensics team. The apartment had been processed, but the results were puzzling. No fingerprints anywhere, not even Rebecca's. No DNA evidence, no fibers, no hair, nothing. It was as if the apartment had been professionally cleaned by experts. Tom, This is starting to feel less like a missing person case and more like something else entirely. Before Tom could respond, Sarah's phone rang. It was Mrs. Patterson, Detective Mills. I remembered something important. Yesterday morning, before I discovered Rebecca was gone, I saw that blue car again. It was parked across the street, and there were 2 men sitting in it. They were there when I went to get my morning paper around 6, but they were gone by the time the police arrived. Sarah grabbed her coat. Mrs. Patterson, we're on our way. Don't talk to anyone else about this. As they drove back to Rebecca's apartment building, Tom voiced what they were both thinking. Sarah, what if Rebecca didn't disappear? What if someone made her disappear? Then we need to figure out why, Sarah replied. And we need to figure out who the mysterious man in her life was. They parked across the street from the apartment building and looked up at the window of 4B. The empty room stared back at them, holding its secrets. The thing that bothers me most, Sarah said, is how professional this was. Moving someone and all their belongings without anyone noticing. Cleaning an apartment so thoroughly that no trace evidence remains. This isn't something an average person could pull off. Tom nodded. This feels organized, maybe even official. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. In her years on the force, she had learned that the most dangerous cases were often the ones that seemed impossible at first glance. And the most dangerous people were those who had the resources to make someone vanish without a trace. As they sat watching the building, Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Was Rebecca Chen in witness protection? Had she stumbled onto something she shouldn't have? Or was she the victim of something much more sinister? The empty room in apartment for B wasn't just a mystery. It was a message. Someone wanted them to know that Rebecca Chen had never existed there. But why? Sarah started the car. They had work to do, and she had a feeling they were running out of time. Sarah had always believed that every person left traces of their existence, like ripples in a pond. But Rebecca Chen seemed to be the exception. After 3 days of investigation, they had more questions than answers. She was sitting in her office Thursday morning, staring at a timeline she'd created on the whiteboard, when Tom knocked on her door. Sarah, we caught a break. Emily Chen just called. She found something in Rebecca's locker at the gym. I thought Rebecca cancelled her gym membership. She did, but apparently she left some things in her locker and forgot to clean it out. The gym was about to throw everything away when Emily remembered Rebecca mentioning it. 20 minutes later, they met Emily at Fitness First, a small gym in downtown. The manager, a muscular man named Derek, led them to the women's locker room, where Emily was waiting with a small box. There wasn't much, Emily said, her voice shaking slightly, but this was hidden in the bottom of her gym bag. She handed Sarah a small key attached to a string. It looked like a safety deposit box key. Did Rebecca ever mention having a safety deposit box? Tom asked. Emily shook her head. She kept all her important papers at home in a filing cabinet. At least, she used to. Sarah examined the key more closely. There were numbers etched on it, 247, and a small logo that she recognized as belonging to First National Bank. We need to get a warrant for that safety deposit box, Sarah told Tom. But Emily held up her hand. Actually, Detective, I might be able to help with that. Rebecca made me a co-signer on all her accounts after her divorce. She said she wanted someone she trusted to have access to her things if anything ever happened to her. 2 hours later, They stood in the vault of First National Bank as Emily used her identification and the key to open safety deposit box 247. Inside, they found documents that made Sarah's blood run cold. There was a photograph of a man in an expensive suit getting out of a black Mercedes. The photo was taken from a distance, but it was clear enough to see his face. Written on the back in Rebecca's handwriting was a name, Vincent Shaw, and a date from 2 months ago. There were also bank statements showing large cash deposits into an account Sarah had never seen before. Someone had been paying Rebecca Chen $5,000 a month for the past 3 months. But most disturbing were the handwritten notes. Rebecca's neat handwriting filled several pages with observations that read like surveillance reports. Vincent Shaw, age 43, arrives at warehouse every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Always alone. Meetings last approximately 2 hours. Blue van arrives at warehouse Thursdays. License plate XKR 4429. Unloads crates, approximately 20 each time. Shaw seems nervous lately. Changed his routine twice this week. And finally, dated just 1 week ago. I think he knows I'm watching. Need to get out soon. Evidence is enough. Tom whistled low. Rebecca was conducting surveillance on this Vincent Shaw guy. Sarah studied the photograph more closely. Vincent Shaw was handsome in a dangerous way, with sharp features and cold eyes. He looked like the kind of man who was used to getting what he wanted. Emily, did Rebecca ever mention investigating anything? Any reason she might be watching someone? Emily looked confused. Rebecca was a nurse, detective. She worked in pediatrics. The only investigating she did was checking on her patients. Sarah spread the contents of the safety deposit box across a table in the bank's private room. Bank statements, photographs, detailed notes, and at the bottom, a flash drive. We need to see what's on this, Tom said, picking up the flash drive. Back at the station, they loaded the flash drive onto Tom's computer. It contained dozens of photographs of Vincent Shaw, the warehouse he visited, the people he met with. There were also audio recordings. Rebecca had been using sophisticated surveillance equipment in one audio file, recorded just 2 weeks ago. They could hear Rebecca's voice clearly. This is Rebecca Chen. Tuesday, March 15th. I've confirmed that Vincent Clow is using the warehouse on Industrial Boulevard for illegal activities. The crates being delivered contain what appears to be stolen merchandise. I have photographs and documentation that should be sufficient for the police. Sarah paused the recording. Tom, if Rebecca was investigating Shaw, who was paying her to do it? The bank statements showed the payments came from something called Redwood Consulting. Tom ran the name through their database. Redwood Consulting is a private investigation firm, he said after a few minutes. High-end stuff. They handle corporate espionage, background checks for wealthy clients, that kind of thing. Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking together. So Rebecca was working as an undercover investigator. But investigating what, exactly? They continued listening to the audio files. In the most recent recording, made just 4 days ago, Rebecca's voice sounded frightened. Vincent is suspicious. He's been asking questions about me around the neighborhood. I think he knows I'm not just his girlfriend. I need to finish this job and disappear before he figures out who I really am. Tom stopped the recording. Girlfriend. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Now the mysterious man Emily had mentioned made sense. Rebecca had been dating Vincent Shaw. As part of her investigation, this is getting dangerous, Sarah said. If Shaw discovered Rebecca was investigating him, Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Detective Mills. Detective, this is Vincent Shaw. I believe you're looking for Rebecca Chen. Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her voice calm. Mr. Shaw, how did you get this number? I have many resources, Detective. I understand Rebecca is missing. I'd like to help find her. Where are you, Mr. Shaw? I'm at my office downtown. Would you like to meet? I have information about Rebecca that I think you'll find very interesting. Sarah looked at Tom, who had heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. He was already reaching for his weapon. Mr. Shaw, we'll be right there. Don't go anywhere. After hanging up, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and dread. In her experience, when the subject of an investigation called the police directly, it meant one of two things. Either they were innocent and wanted to help, or they were very guilty and very confident they wouldn't get caught. Tom, call for backup. And get me everything we can find on Vincent Shaw before we head downtown. As they prepared to meet the man who might hold the key to Rebecca Chen's disappearance, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something much more dangerous than a simple missing person case. The empty room in apartment for B had been just the beginning. Now they were about to come face to face with the man who might be responsible for making Rebecca Chen vanish without a trace. Vincent Shaw's office was on the 32nd floor of a glass tower downtown, with a view that stretched across the entire city. Sarah and Tom were escorted by a security guard through marble hallways to a reception area, where they waited exactly 3 minutes before being shown into Shaw's office. Vincent Shaw was even more imposing in person than in Rebecca's photographs. He sat behind a massive oak desk, wearing an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. His office was decorated with expensive art and leather-bound books, the kind of place designed to intimidate visitors. Detectives Mills and Rodriguez, Shaw said, standing to shake their hands. His grip was firm, confident. Thank you for coming so quickly. Please, sit. Sarah remained standing. Mr. Shaw, we'd like to ask you some questions about Rebecca Chen. Of course, Rebecca is... was very important to me. I'm deeply concerned about her disappearance. When did you last see Miss Chen? Tom asked, pulling out his notepad. Shaw walked to the window, looking out at the city. Tuesday evening. We had dinner at Romano's, that Italian place on 5th Street. She seemed nervous, distracted. I asked if something was wrong, but she said she was just tired from work. Sarah studied Shaw's body language. He seemed relaxed, almost too relaxed for someone whose girlfriend had mysteriously vanished. Mr. Shaw, how long were you and Rebecca dating? About 3 months. We met through mutual friends. Shaw returned to his desk and opened a file folder. Detective Mills, I should probably tell you that Rebecca wasn't entirely honest with me about who she was. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What do you mean? Shaw slid a photograph across the desk. It showed Rebecca sitting in a car with a telephoto lens camera, clearly conducting surveillance. I had her investigated 2 weeks ago, Shaw said calmly. I discovered she was working for Redwood Consulting, spying on me. Tom leaned forward. And how did that make you feel, Mr. Shaw? Shaw smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Professionally impressed, actually. She was very good at her job. I never suspected until my own security team brought it to my attention. Sarah felt like they were dancing around something dangerous. Mr. Shaw, what exactly do you do for a living? I'm an import-export businessman. I help companies move products internationally. Sometimes those companies prefer to keep their business arrangements private. And Rebecca was investigating your business. Rebecca was hired by one of my competitors to document my operations. Corporate espionage is more common than you might think, Detective. Sarah pulled out her own folder and showed Shaw some of Rebecca's surveillance notes. According to these, you were involved in moving stolen merchandise. Shaw read the notes carefully, then laughed. Detective, I move high-end electronics for clients who value discretion. Sometimes those clients are celebrities, sometimes they're companies avoiding certain tax implications. It's all perfectly legal, just private. Tom stood up and walked around Shaw's desk. Mr. Shaw, where were you Tuesday night after your dinner with Rebecca? I was here, working late. My security cameras will confirm that. I was in this office until nearly midnight. Sarah felt frustrated. Shaw had an answer for everything, and all his answers sounded plausible, but something felt wrong. Mr. Shaw, if you knew Rebecca was spying on you, why didn't you confront her? Shaw's expression changed slightly, becoming more serious. Because I cared about her, and because I was planning to offer her a job. A job. Rebecca was wasted as a nurse, detective. She had skills that my organization could use. I was going to ask her to work for me instead of against me. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from the station. It was urgent. Check Shaw's. Building security footage now. Mr. Shaw, we're going to need to see your security footage from Tuesday night. Of course. Shaw pressed a button on his intercom. Send Mr. Peterson in, please. A few minutes later, a tall man in a security uniform entered the office. Peterson, please show the detectives our security footage from Tuesday evening. They went to a security room filled with monitors. Peterson pulled up footage from Tuesday night, showing Shaw entering the building at 6 p.m. and not leaving until the next morning. But as Sarah watched the footage, she noticed something strange. At 8:30 p.m., Shaw left his office and went to the elevator. The cameras showed him getting off at the parking garage level. Mr. Peterson, do you have cameras in the parking garage? Peterson looked uncomfortable. Some areas, not all. Sarah felt her detective instincts screaming. Show us the garage footage. The garage cameras showed Shaw's black Mercedes leaving the building at 8:45 p.m. and returning at 11:15 p.m. Sarah turned to Shaw. You said you were in your office all night. Shaw's calm expression didn't change. I went to get dinner. I forgot about that. But you said you had dinner with Rebecca at Romano's. I had a second dinner. I was hungry. Tom stepped closer to Shaw. Where did you go for this second dinner, Mr. Shaw? For the first time, Shaw hesitated. I don't remember exactly. Somewhere close. Sarah felt the case breaking open. Shaw was lying, and his careful composure was starting to crack. Mr. Shaw, I think you need to tell us exactly where you went Tuesday night. Shaw walked back to his office, with Sarah and Tom following. Once they were back in the elegant room, Shaw closed the door and turned to face them. Detectives, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Yes, I knew Rebecca was investigating me. Yes, I left my office Tuesday night, but I didn't hurt her. Then where did you go? Shaw opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small recording device. I went to Rebecca's apartment. I was going to confront her about the investigation and play her this recording. Sarah felt ice in her veins. What recording? Shaw pressed play. Rebecca's voice filled the room. Vincent, if you're listening to this, it means something has happened to me. I need you to know that I wasn't just investigating your business. I was investigating you because someone thinks you killed a woman named Maria Santos 3 years ago. Sarah grabbed the recorder. Where did you get this? Rebecca left it in my car the last time we went out. I think she wanted me to find it. The recording continued. The person who hired me believes you're responsible for Maria's disappearance. But Vincent, I've been watching you for 3 months, and I don't think you're a killer. I think someone is setting you up. Tom was already on his phone, running Maria Santos through the database. Shaw sat down heavily in his chair. Detective Mills, I never killed anyone, but someone wants me to look guilty. And I think that same someone took Rebecca to keep her quiet. Sarah felt the case shifting beneath her feet. What if Vincent Shaw wasn't the villain in this story? What if he was another victim? Mr. Shaw, we need to know everything. Who would want to frame you for murder? Shaw looked out at the city skyline, and for the first time, Sarah saw genuine fear in his eyes. Detective, I've been in the import business for 15 years. I've made a lot of enemies. But there's one person who has the resources to make people disappear and the motivation to destroy me. Who? Shaw turned back to face them. My former business partner, Marcus Webb. As Shaw began to tell them about Marcus Webb and their partnership that had ended in betrayal and threats, Sarah realized that Rebecca Chen's disappearance wasn't just about corporate espionage or stolen merchandise. It was about revenge, murder, and someone who had the power to make people vanish without leaving a trace. The empty room and apartment for B was starting to make terrible sense. End of the story. The investigation continues as Sarah and Tom discover that Rebecca's disappearance is connected to a web of corporate crime, murder, and revenge that stretches back years. The empty room was not where the mystery ended, it was where it began.